If you were to ask any Tales fan what their favorite aspect of the series is, I can personally guarantee that the two most common answers would be the combat and the characters. While the storytelling in the franchise can be a little more hit or miss, even lesser titles are acknowledged and praised for having endearing casts of misfits that veritably stand out amongst the deluge of more typical JRPGs. Beyond just having a run-of-the-mill shonen protagonist with the cute childhood friend, the smart wizard dude that conveniently knows how everything works, and the dumbass himbo for comedic value, Tales has a way of taking even the most trodden of archetypes and elevating them beyond their tropey baselines. While it's sometimes easy to forget, the Tales series is fairly old and has been around for over 2.5 decades since its inception. And while opinions undoubtedly vary from person to person, the character writing has remained consistently resonant amongst both fans and newcomers alike. It's not uncommon to find people that play these games specifically because they love the cast so much, and are even willing to put up with other aspects of the games they aren't as enthused about, just to spend more time with their amusing comrades. Speaking personally for a moment, despite generally enjoying the combat in this series, I don't really like how it functions in Tales of Berseria specifically, yet I have no reservations in calling it one of my favorite entries, and while that's due in large part to the story itself being so well told, it's also because I adore the grumpy band of anti-heroes I get to pal around with the entire time. This inevitably begs the question: how is this achieved so consistently and effectively across the series? Before I answer that question, I need to explain what a skit is within the context of a Tales game. While they do differ somewhat from entry to entry, generally speaking, they're relatively short dialogue sequences that are made available to the player after fulfilling a variety of conditions. These can range from making progress in the main story, procuring a specific item, cooking different types of food, stumbling upon a landmark, and several other similar types of contextual triggers that inspire colorful commentary and fun interactions from the cast. It wasn't always like this though, and we have Tales of Symphonia in particular to thank for that. In the entries prior to it, the player could press the select button at any point when exploring the world map, and your party members would talk about where to go next as a way of reminding the player on what they're supposed to be doing in order to progress, all the while occasionally throwing in some light humor and other forms of character expression to keep it from being too dry. What originally started as simply a tool to organically assist the player was expanded to be something so much more. During these early stages, it was a far cry from what the modern iteration of this system currently looks like. But even this prototypical starting point established a few of the core tenets that would become part of the DNA of the system. Most importantly, that it's an excuse to see these characters goof off. When Tales of Symphonia released, these short sequences became less about pushing players along the correct path in order to continue the main story, but more so as a way for the party to bounce off of each other in unique and interesting ways. While this shift meant that the utility of the original feature was lost in the process, what replaced it was far more valuable. As more games would be released over the years, these skits continued to evolve until they were fleshed out into fully formed discussions. These backs and forths run the gamut of simple gags for comedic purposes, in-depth conversations about the current events of the plot, dynamic explorations of the interpersonal relationships, as well as a method of elucidating the nature of how the world functions. Despite how vital all of this seems on the surface, it's important to remember that regardless of the weight, or lack thereof, in each of these talks, that all of these skits are non-compulsory. While playing any of these games, the option to view them is typically displayed at the bottom of the screen in the form of a button prompt. But it's just that, an option, meaning that it's entirely possible to ignore said prompt for the entirety of the game experience. Well, wait a minute. If none of these exchanges are intrinsically necessary, then why bother? if you don't have to actually see any of them, then isn't it all just fluff at the end of the day? It might be tempting to assume that if something isn't absolutely essential, or doesn't in some way contribute to the core functions of either the narrative or the game mechanics, then it should be removed for being a useless appendage. While that can sound reasonable on the face of it, if all works of fiction worked in such a utilitarian manner, then a lot of what makes them special would be completely lost. Stephen King once wrote a foreword to the uncut version of his book, The Stand, wherein he reintroduced about 400 pages, a not insignificant amount of content. As a way of clarifying his decision to do so, this is what he had to say about it.
If all of the story is there, one might ask, then why bother? Isn't it just indulgence, after all? It better not be. If it is, then I've spent a large portion of my life wasting my time. As it happens, I think that, in really good stories, the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. If that were not so, the following would be a perfectly acceptable version of Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel were two children with a nice father and a nice mother. The nice mother died and the father married a bitch. The bitch wanted the kids out of the way so she'd have more money to spend on herself. She bullied her spineless, soft-headed hubby into taking Hansel and Gretel into the woods and killing them. The kids' father relented at the last moment, allowing them to live so they could starve to death in the woods instead of dying quickly and mercifully at the blade of his knife. While they were wandering around, they found a house made out of candy. It was owned by a witch who was into cannibalism. She locked them up and told them that when they were good and fat, she was going to eat them. But the kids got the best of her. Hansel shoved her into her own oven, they found the witch's treasure, and they must have found a map too, because they eventually arrived home. When they got there, Dad gave the bitch the boot, and they lived happily ever after. The end. I don't know what you think, but for me, that version's a loser. The story is there, but it's not elegant. It's like the Cadillac with the chrome stripped off and the paint sanded down to dull metal. It goes somewhere, but it ain't, boss.
In other words, if the car still turns on and you can get to your destination, that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to drive it. The skits are a big part of what brings everything together and elevates the series into something more. It isn't just random dialogue sequences for the sake of filling in time. They're a vital part of the experience and have become integral to the identity of the series. So then, how exactly is this accomplished? What is it about skits specifically that have become essential in creating a cohesive whole? Let's find out. First off, while I will be speaking very generally about the skit system, it is important to note that the approach differs from game to game. While it is true that Symphonia created the template with which future entries would build off of, and that the general skeleton has remained roughly consistent across the series, like a jazz cover of an AC/DC track, some titles have taken the central ideas into very different directions, from presentation to the content itself. For example, Vesperia tended to have shorter, punchier skits that were more often than not focused on humor, particularly where the characters would break each other's balls by relentlessly making fun. Berseria, on the other hand, favored longer, more in-depth conversations, either about the lore or the machinations of the plot. And Arise introduced a comic book style of presentation to focus more on the amplified visual kinesthetic element that it uniquely added to the format. So while not every broad stroke reason perfectly applies to every single entry, you can be rest assured that they largely pertain to at least some extent. As an aside, I will also be using made-up examples for the sake of keeping spoilers to a minimum. I think one of the primary reasons skits are so effective and is an integral contributing factor to the consistent likability of each cast is that it allows the player to observe their behavior in low-stakes situations. If there's always tension, in every dialogue-based sequence, and everything that is discussed is exclusively plot relevant. While that might lead to a briskly paced story, it also runs the risk of leaving characters feeling reactionary, as if all there is to these people is their responses to what's going on in the plot, rather than who they are as individuals. To be clear, this isn't bad storytelling, at least not on its own, especially considering that plenty of great narratives have been woven in this fashion. That being said, for most RPGs, these games are typically about going on long journeys, where you have to spend the grand majority of it palling around with the main cast. Therefore, the time spent getting to know them, their goals and aspirations, the more it establishes a connection between the player and their ragtag group of cohorts. The stronger the connection, the more you'll feel for them and their plight. Their victories ever sweeter, while their defeats all the more crushing. So for an RPG especially, if there are only these types of high-stress scenes, then your only exposure to these characters across an average of 60 hours of playtime is how they function within those very specific sets of circumstances, whereas most people in their everyday lives don't typically have to worry about fighting monsters all day, trying to save the world, or concerning themselves with the morality of having to kill their best friend who is trying to become a god because their mom just didn't give them enough hugs. While this may be what most fantasy characters are forced to contend with, I don't think this is what should exclusively define who they are, because people are so much more than simply what happens to them. Every individual has their own thoughts, feelings, and desires, and if you truly want to get to know someone and understand who they are, you need to be able to see them in a mundane setting, where they have a chance to just be themselves. Applying this logic narratively will, in turn, help the characters feel like they're their own free-thinking people with their own sense of agency within the world. Even a legendary chosen hero of light and myth or whatever is going to have goals and interests outside of the goings-ons of the main story. Like their weird stamp collection that they've been putting together since they were a kid. Or finally fessing up to their cute childhood friend they've had a crush on. Or maybe the sexy new party member who recently entered the picture and is complicating their feelings. This is where the magic of Skits comes to strut its stuff. It allows us to view the characters in these small situations that let their personalities shine through in an organic fashion and cements them in our minds as diverse individuals. It also goes a long way in making the party feel like an actual group that's traveling together. Here's the thing, people love to talk. Give them the chance and they'll just go on forever about themselves, their opinions on things, the fact that Jennifer is a skank because her ass is too fat. Hell, even introverts like myself will blab your ear off for hours on end if you bring up the right subject, and are willing to hear our thesis on why JRPG characters talking about literally fucking nothing is somehow the best thing ever. So whenever I play these long JRPGs, or just RPGs in general, where the cast only speak during cutscenes, it always strikes me as odd. I mean, really, just think about it for a minute. Surely these people aren't traveling day in and day out in complete silence, right? That would just be really weird and awkward, especially if these characters are portrayed as friends or at least friendly with each other. Granted, I don't expect, nor want, constant conversations bombarding the player about every little thing with no sense of pause or relief. There is a balance to be struck, and surely these people have more to say than just what pertains to the main plot. Doesn't it make more sense that a traveling group, even if they were forced together through happenstance, would pass the time with some casual conversation? Now, for older titles with less storage space to contend with, this is far more understandable, and I'd say a bit of imagination is needed to abstract these auxiliary dialogues happening during their travels. But for more modern games, the silence starts to become a noticeable issue. The skits are a great way of solving this problem, as it in turn makes the cast feel like an actual collection of guys and gals going on a journey together, rather than a bunch of mute weirdos that only seem to have something to say when the plot demands it. Something else that makes skits so good is that more than just providing opportunities to further flesh out and expand on the personality traits that have already been established in the main cutscenes, this also gives us an opportunity to see different shades of these characters that we normally wouldn't be able to witness. Let's say we have a party member that's normally a rough and gruff badass, but then in a skit we find out that they have a soft spot for kittens. Under normal circumstances, this may be a difficult detail to express in a plot-based cutscene, but in a skit this can very easily be slotted in. The player could be potentially walking around a town wherein a nearby kitten could trigger the skit, and voila, the perfect excuse for a fun interaction, and now we have another bit of texture and nuance to someone that might have otherwise come across as a bit one note. Some might argue that while this seems nice, ultimately it's a small addition that doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but I tend to disagree and believe there's more to it than that. There's a certain saying people often use to describe a bunch of tiny flaws that on their own aren't a big deal, but altogether they weigh the entire experience down. This is known as death by 1,000 cuts. What is being added to these characters through these dialogue sequences is quite literally the opposite. These are a bunch of tiny additions that end up culminating together to elevate a good character into a great one. I guess you could say in this case it would be life by 1,000 hugs, I suppose. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that when you have a whole game's worth of these small anecdotes coming together, he's no longer a one-note buff boy, but rather a lovable himbo with a heart of gold that only looks the way he does out of his insecurities of being judged by others. While I may be making this up, the thing is that every game in this series is chock full of stuff like this, taking these characters and adding so much to them. And even though each individual detail on its own may not seem like much, it is how they all add up at the end that matters. The reason why this works is because people in the real world aren't simply defined by a handful of broad characteristics, but rather a multitude of tiny details and nuances that make us who we are. Skits can also create meaning and context for the different elements that comprise who a character is. As a purely hypothetical example, let's say there's a party member who is a particularly skilled swordsman, but a skit could bring to life that the reason why they're so good is they've been training since they were a child, all the while looking up to and admiring their father, who was the head of the royal guard. Now, this example pertains specifically to their fighting style. However, these sorts of backstories can be applied to a variety of character quirks, talents, and behavior, which go a long way in helping us understand not just who that person is, but specifically why they are as we know them up to that point in the story. It's not enough to just have a bunch of details attached to a character. It's important to also contextualize their actions, which in turn helps us understand them on a deeper level. It can even take an otherwise stereotypical trait and make it feel unique. The tsundere is a popular and overused archetype that I'm sure many anime fans are familiar with. But to quickly explain to the uninitiated, it's someone that tends to be very prickly and difficult to deal with, but in rare moments can be very sweet and tender. So imagine for a moment that you were to learn that the reason why they act like this is because they had their heart broken before you met them, causing them to feel conflicted about getting close to others. Suddenly, a tired trope becomes interesting and gets you invested in who this person is, and makes them feel more real because there's a history to them. So with this in mind, details that get expounded upon inevitably color your perception of the cast and the nature of their actions, even during gameplay. Going back to this theoretical swordsman character, when you play as them or see them fight alongside you in battle, you'll be subtly reminded of their admiration for their father. No longer are they just using random attacks for the sake of it, these are special abilities that were passed down to him, giving them a sense of purpose and granting insight as to why they fight in the specific way that they do. Again, it all goes a long way in making this character feel real. Something else the system is very efficient at is conveying information about the world in a natural way. The player will need some form of exposition in order to get a better understanding of why the world works the way it does. Sometimes this comes from the wisest or most intelligent character explaining higher concept ideas to the rest of the cast in a way they can understand. Or it could simply be that someone is ignorant of the ways of the world and requires even the most basic of explanations, which in turn benefits the player. Even if there isn't an excuse like the main character having amnesia or they've been living in a backwater village their entire lives, the fact of the matter is that there's going to be gaps in everyone's knowledge, and sometimes they'll need things explained to them, and skits are a good way of doing this. Something unique to Tales of Grace's F is that there would be skits dedicated to a variety of landmarks, which is great for showing what the characters know and helps the world feel fully realized and lived in by providing detailed stories and information about specific parts of the environment. This in turn actually does circle back to the characters, as it allows the cast to become more informed and also offers an opportunity to whoever is providing the explanations to look well learned and worldly. There's usually one character in particular that tends to explain everything, but there are cases where the cast in general is fairly knowledgeable, which is great. Just allows all of them to look good and show off what they know. The final point I want to make just might be the most important, but is arguably the most simple. It lets the cast interact with each other. It's one thing to build up these people and flesh them out individually, which is all well and good, but to create a real sense of camaraderie amongst the team, they have to converse with one another. This works really well in Tales games because each party member tends to be very distinct with opposing personality traits, so having them talk to each other can be fun and entertaining. Someone that's on the shy and introverted side can be brought out of their shell by another who is more friendly and empathic. The prickly and grumpy character can soften up due to wanting to protect the naive and innocent one. The silly guy that treats everything like a joke can be brought down to earth by someone that sees through their facade due to their years of wisdom. And several other countless personality types that can converge, resulting in an infinite amount of unique exchanges. Now, while I did praise skits earlier specifically for not being beholden to the plot, admittedly another strong benefit is that they allow discussions of certain story beats in greater detail, which more importantly invites them to express what their opinions are on the situation, leading to disagreements. Just because they're all on the same side, that doesn't mean that they're going to always see eye to eye on every issue. It can be fascinating to see these backs and forths and get a better understanding of where they stand and why. Friction within the group can be intriguing, as it might get boring to see people that exclusively only get along with each other for the whole journey. So moments of tension and discord can be introduced in the main story and then expanded upon in skits. Situations where a party member betrayed the group and were reluctantly brought back in the fold, or made major mistakes that most are unhappy with, can really be felt during these moments. This also ties in well with a previous idea I brought up, in that it simply makes more sense that these characters would talk to each other during their downtime, And that includes these uncomfortable moments. If a new party member is a character that defected from the enemy side, even if they say they've renounced their old ways, there's absolutely going to be distrust amongst the group. They wouldn't just accept that person and go along their merry way. It just wouldn't be believable that the party would be completely silent about such a major shakeup within their group. Questions and concerns will be brought up. Accusations will be flung. The people that believe in that character will stick up for them, while the others will in turn suggest giving them the boot. These are just a handful of examples, but the main takeaway here is that ideas that were merely touched upon or introduced in the main story are given room to be expanded upon in multiple different avenues, allowing for a much deeper exploration of the characters and the relationships between each other. Skits are one of my favorite parts of the Tales series. I look forward to them each and every time, whether I'm returning to an old favorite or experiencing a new entry altogether. They've become such a core part of the experience, so much so that if one were to compare a playthrough with and without them, it would undeniably change how the cast is perceived. The characters may technically be the same, but they're not as vibrant. The components that make them who they are may largely still be present, yet something will feel missing, and it's all because of these silly, fun, sometimes insightful, and heartfelt interactions giving this series heart and soul. By the end of these games, your merry little band of rapscallions will feel almost like a family, not just to each other, but for you, the player. The ending won't just be the conclusion of a fantastical tale, but a heartfelt goodbye to those that you've spent this long journey growing close to. And yet, something is indeed missing. Full disclosure, that last paragraph was supposed to be the end of the video. My intention was simply to do the typical video essay thing, wherein after I argue all of my points, I would then wrap them up in a neat and tidy bow. But in this case, I don't think that's quite good enough. Now look, I can sit here and happily intellectualize about JRPG anime characters conversing over silly topics literally all day. But as I got deeper into this and tried to analyze it, I had a realization of personal significance. When I was a teenager, I used to frequent my high school's anime club, of which I was incredibly grateful for because I was able to become a part of a group where I could be myself. Unfortunately, I'm no longer in contact with any of those folks anymore. I don't know what they're up to now or how their lives have played out, as sad as that is to admit. Regardless of current circumstances though, I do truly cherish the time I did spend with them. Those were significant experiences for me growing up, and I feel that I became a better person because of them. In any other context, what I'm about to say might have sounded silly, but hopefully now, after reaching the end of this video, you'll have a better idea of where I'm coming from when I say that whenever I play a Tales game, the skits subtly remind me of that time. The backs and forths between the characters is not unlike the interactions I had when I was with my closest friends, and everyone was comfortable just being themselves. I'm gonna wager that a lot of the people that cite the characters as being their favorite part of this series, whether they realize it or not, they're doing so for a similar reason. That these characters also remind them of their own friends, whether past or present. I also wouldn't be surprised if there are those who can't actually relate to the group dynamic on a personal level, but gravitate towards these games regardless because it offers that experience for them. Those that are less socially inclined than others are used to only being friends with a very select number of individuals and are only able to interact with them one-on-one. And these games in turn allow them to fulfill that type of social interaction that they normally don't get in real life. Sorry if this is getting a little too real, but I don't have friend groups like that. Not anymore. At least not in real life. Don't worry, this isn't some vain attempt at a pity party. I'm perfectly fine, and I'm absolutely content with the people I pal around with nowadays. But I'd be lying if I didn't admit that a part of me doesn't miss that feeling of going out on weekends with a bunch of friends to play Super Smash Bros. At someone's house while talking about some new anime I'd never heard of before. Looking back, I can't help but connect the dots and realize what these games have provided for me on a personal level. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that when I played Tales games in high school, I related to them, because it was a lot like being with my friends again. When I play them nowadays, though, it feels nostalgic, because, it's a lot like being with my friends again. This has been Daniel, everyone. I hope to see you all again next time.